In 1987, gay activists plastered New York with the simple slogan, "Silence equals death." The campaign was closely associated with AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, ACT UP, and was in response to the AIDS crisis that was silently killing gay men. The emotion that I remember most vividly from the day following Omar Mateen's massacre at the gay nightclub Pulse was anger. At Mateen, at the fact that the tragedy was real, but also at the conditions that made it possible. It was ACT UP's slogan and that crisis that took the lives of so many that my mind went to. Because saying silence equals death makes silence and death a collective responsibility. It makes grief something to be vocalized, and it highlights that silence is a tactic used by those complicit in the deaths of people marginalised in our society. If 49 queer people had died days apart and their deaths hadn't been caused by Omar Mateen, would they have been met with silence? That seems to be the pattern when it comes to queer death normally. We rightly respond to massacres and how visceral they are with a particular shock and pain. They take away the lives of those who are sharing a common experience en masse, and rightly our response is en masse too. But that isn't all that was at play in the response to what happened in Orlando. From the very beginning, it was a terrorist attack, and it was undeniably described that way because of the gunman's religion. Those who have assumed that 1.6 billion people in this world are all completely set against so-called Western values also assume that being queer and being a Muslim are two completely incompatible things, but also that it would be natural for a Muslim to want to destroy queer people. This is a racist stereotype, but it also works to exonerate whiteness of its own problem with hatred and violence towards queer people. With Western society seen as able to tolerate some aspects of queerness, we don't need to think about the fact that 1 in 6 LGBT people in the UK will be the subject of a hate crime, or the rate at which trans women, and especially trans women of colour, are killed, or even that the law maintains many in our community as second-class citizens. On all this, silence is maintained, and as long as Muslims can be scapegoated for a supposed backward relationship to gender and sexuality, everything else is successfully pinkwashed in the most violent way. The obsession with this prejudice in Islam couldn't be more hypocritical. It ignores queer people living as Muslims and presumes to speak on their behalf. We now know that Mateen was quite possibly a gay man himself. Would he have been any less scared of this or self-hating if he was an American Christian? Queerness and Islam are two houses, both alike in dignity. In this fair society, they are both downtrodden and subject to attack. For example, in reporting Mateen's killing spree at Pulse, the Daily Mail opted to relegate the story to its 4th page. Perhaps they couldn't make their minds up about who they hated more out of queers and Muslims, given that they've so successfully attacked both in the past. Another horrific tragedy like that at Pulse could easily happen in our society, and the perpetrator needn't be a Muslim. The seeds for that sort of hatred aren't exclusive to any one religion, or even religion at all. In 1999, David Copeland took communities in Brick Lane, Brixton and Soho as targets for nail bomb attacks, spurred on by his fascist ideology. 17 years later, we have Orlando, and the danger this time is that we entirely miss the context that allowed it to happen. The danger is that we continue to be silent the rest of the time, only responding when tragedies successfully become public. For some of us, where our lives are at stake, that isn't possible. For us, silence equals death, which is why we'll continue to struggle as Muslims and as queers. We know the violence of racism and queerphobia shares roots and causes, and we also know that male and patriarchal violence is at work in the loss of queer life. About these things, we won't be silent and we won't be killed.